pleased to have everybody on the call today. Appreciate the title of the presentation was quite a mouthful. I was keen to kind of get across the context of the presentation today. So thankfully, I guess, I appreciate everybody's sort of FDs and senior finance folk on the call today, is that I'm not going to show actually any KPIs on the presentation today. So that might disappoint some of you. Hopefully it pleases others, but it's really going to be a presentation around the context of KPIs and how you can use them for the best benefit in your organization. So without further ado, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So bear with me. If I can share that and put that on screen show. Hopefully you can see the presentation on the screen, and we'll carry on. So as I said, I'm going to give you some personal perspectives today based on my experience of using KPIs. And as I said, hopefully today you'll get a few nuggets to take away. I appreciate you'll be at various different stages of development with your organizations and your businesses and so on. So my hope is that in some way I can help with how you think about KPIs within your respective organizations and businesses and the challenges that you face. So in terms of the agenda, and this is what I'm going to cover off. So a little bit about KPIs and why you need them. Most importantly, I think also business operating context and culture is critical, as well as potentially the sort of change management and resistance you may get to implementing KPIs. I appreciate some businesses are data-led businesses, as I would call them, but others tend to be managed potentially less with the kind of harder KPIs as such, and is managed more on a sort of a gut feel or a very much a sort of owner managed kind of model, whereby there's an inherent understanding of the key things that drive the business, and hence therefore the consideration of the need for KPIs within the business might be limited. So I'll talk a bit about what to do in that kind of scenario. Then I'll look at the alignment to business priorities and how you sort of might go about and think about that. How many do you need? Obviously the title is key performance indicators, right? So how many is key is a question that we must ask ourselves. And then finally, from an accountability and a performance management perspective, actually, if KPIs are going to be meaningful and useful within your business, there needs to be a degree of accountability and performance management to the metrics. So I think an important point about KPIs is the appropriate measurement and management of the metrics done on a consistent basis with accountability in your team. With that accountability, you will drive improvements in performance, and you'll ensure that the organization is focused on the things that are important to the business. Primarily, I see KPIs as a continuous improvement tool, where setting targets against those KPIs and thinking about how they're deployed within your business can enable you to learn a lot about the blockers to progress within your business. And in turn, what actions you might need to take to address those blockers and issues. Without such metrics in place, it becomes more difficult to identify things on a consistent basis that might be holding you back as a business. And on the next slide, I talk about some more about why you need them. Sorry. So in terms of why you need them, then the obvious thing is to monitor the health of the company overall. Also to measure progress. As I said, setting targets is an important way to look at how you're progressing as an organization. And I think on the bottom right hand side of this graphic here are the two most important things to me. which they enable you to identify and solve, I guess, the problems and opportunities that may exist because of the way that you're continually and consistently measuring the KPIs. But also they allow you to make adjustments to get back on track. And I think for me, they're the two things around driving improvements in company performance and strategic deployment that are critical, because in those discussions, you learn so much more about the things, as I said on the earlier slide, that are potentially blocking your progress. Additionally, it will enable you to spot trends and perhaps seasonality within your business, which potentially isn't apparent if you don't measure such KPIs. As I said at the beginning, the operating context and culture of the business is critical if you're going to be implementing a set of KPIs or extending their use. Potentially you're implementing them for the first time and it's new. I think in that scenario that can be quite challenging. But a few questions here in terms of you and your respective businesses are worth asking before you embark on a process of rolling out and implementing KPIs. So first off, does your business actually want to be metric led? I know this might seem like a strange question, particularly with us finance guys on the call today, but ultimately, if there's a resistance to managing the business in a certain way, that's going to put blockers in your progress in terms of implementing and rolling out KPIs and so on. I guess also within this piece is, what do you actually want the KPIs to achieve? Are you looking to measure a strategic imperative, maybe something around growth or customer penetration or such metrics like that? Or is your need much more critical? So for example, if you're in a distressed situation and cash flow is an issue, it might be very much more focused on the day-to-day metrics such as age debt and DSO, or days sales outstanding for debtors, for example. So I guess understanding what your key priorities are is critical in terms of the context of KPI setting and how you go about choosing the right ones. I think also to have a fairly well-established strategy is crucial, as crucial almost as having the alignment on those priorities, because of course, if you're setting about implementing a KPI dashboard, for example, you want to ensure that there's a senior alignment on the priorities for KPIs within the business. And then finally, think about target setting and the fact that KPIs can be used in a couple of different ways. So, for example, they can be used as stretch goals, things that you want to try and achieve that create a scenario of what's called breakthrough thinking. By setting a target that's out there, it forces you to think differently. It forces you to think differently about a problem that ordinarily you might think for just small incremental improvements, you might not get to that point, because it might be clear in setting that stretch objective that you absolutely have to do something different within your business, within your organization to do to reach that goal. And then also a question mark really around how established is your management team. So are you in a new management team where relationships are just being formed and trust is in the process of being developed? Or indeed, are you an established management team where you can challenge and be very open and with how you look at the business, and that's not going to cause potentially personality battles in the boardroom as such. And as I sort of move into that piece, the next piece is really around change management and resistance. So if you're setting about implementing KPIs for the first time, or indeed expanding them beyond what they're currently used for today, senior buy-in to that will be critical for the success of that implementation. Clearly, if the business leaders aren't supporting what you're trying to do from a numbers and metrics standpoint, then it's going to be difficult to get that implemented to the extent that you believe working with your colleagues is necessary. Ultimately, a foundation of trust needs to exist, because when you have KPIs, it might highlight potential shortcomings or issues with certain areas of the business, which might not be comfortable for everybody in that environment. So again, you need to think about what potential work needs to be done from an HR perspective to bring the team together and ensure that KPIs are used and in an environment of trust and mutual respect. I think also following on from that is there will be some people within the organization that think that, you know, measurement by KPIs and so on is sort of an unnecessary bureaucracy, or might not be needed because people understand what's going on in the business and so on. So I think it's important to engage with the people that you might think might be resistant to the change, and see what can be done in terms of demonstrating what's in it for them, and creating some kind of mutual benefit as to why you would consider the implementation of such KPIs to be necessary. I think, as I said, sponsorship needs to come from the top, and I would also encourage that you go easy to begin with. Certainly in the case where you're implementing a set of KPIs for the first time, it'd very much be a case of a small amount of metrics initially, at least. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about what is a good amount of metrics and such like. It's not a one size fits all. The number of metrics that you need in a business will vary depending on the operating context, the things that you want to measure, whether they're departmental measures or whether they're strategic measures. But my encouragement would be, certainly in the scenario where, you know, very little in terms of metrics or KPIs are being managed and measured within the business, I would certainly go steady to begin with, as you get people's buy-in and engagement with the emotional process of this, which is so important to actually the work of KPIs and KPI setting being useful to the business. Moving on then to the alignment to business priorities, then it's important that you directly align your KPIs to your business priorities. In practice, this sounds like a very, very simple and easy statement to achieve. However, sometimes you can have several measures for the same thing. And I think it's important that in that scenario that you do some analysis around what would be the most impacting. Sorry, I'm just getting a bit of feedback there. Can everybody still hear me okay? I'll assume so. I'll carry on. And essentially, those KPIs shouldn't be just financial. They should support each area of the business and its specific objectives, which roll up into the core objectives for the organization as a whole. As I said, consider ranking your KPIs in terms of the ease of measurement, which will help you identify the best ones to measure. And I'd also go on to say that sometimes measures can be open to interpretation. So I think it's important to make sure it's clear the linkage of a given KPI to a specific strategic objectives. And then have a session with the team, get the team on board, kick the ideas around, And I think that will engage the team more widely in why KPIs are necessary, why the measures are chosen, and essentially really support that improvement in performance and company success. On this slide, how many KPIs do we need? Well, it really depends on what they are being used for and the operating context. A few strategic KPIs make sense, but as they roll down into the organization, into more operational areas of the business, you might need more. But I think it's important to strike the balance and ensure that you don't have too many. You don't have lots of overlapping KPIs, and the actual production of the KPIs becomes an industry in itself. And then finally, on this slide, just fine tune as you go. And then finally, I guess the most important part of the presentation really is around accountability and performance management. Reviewing the metrics and KPIs at regular intervals is very important. To do it daily, weekly, monthly, depending on what the metric is and what you're trying to use it for, is critical, because it does give you that review and feedback loop that you're able to assess where the performance is, what needs to be done about improving it or moving it forward, and also ensuring that the KPIs are actually presented by the people that own the metrics. I think as part of going about setting KPIs, that you ensure that everyone is allocated their specific KPIs to talk to, and it doesn't just become the job of finance to talk through. Set the targets, as I mentioned earlier, appropriate to your performance objectives. So if you're looking to stretch performance, then I think you need to make that clear with the organization, versus essentially small incremental improvements, or ensuring that operations are being delivered effectively. For example, on-time delivery being very high percentage is just kind of more of a business as usual rather than a continuous improvement metric. And one thing obviously not to do is to hammer the reds, because missing KPIs can become fraught with being not driving the behaviors that you're looking for out of the KPIs. Out of that, dedicating the time to understanding why you've missed the target is absolutely critical in terms of problem solving and ensuring that you really identify the real and actionable root causes as to why potentially you've missed your target. So that's it really. Just to sort of summarize then, before you think about implementing KPIs, ensure that you're thinking about how your business operates and its key challenges. Think carefully about how you sell the benefits internally, and be realistic about what you think you can achieve. And also tackle the likely objections to why KPIs might not be thought to be a good idea. Ultimately, you want to ensure that you align those KPIs to your agreed priorities, regularly review them, and embrace the reds. I think it's key to performance improvement is as much understanding why you haven't delivered on something rather than why you have. And then finally, ensure that you continue to review with the business, and make changes based on that feedback. So that's really it in terms of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for any questions.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Paul. That was really informative and insightful with regards to the topic. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to actually ask Paul directly rather than put them in the chat. You can, you're very welcome to, if you want to raise your hand, if you've got a question that you'd actually like to ask, or if there's an experience of concerning this topic that you feel would be really valuable to share with your peers. Seems that it was all quite straightforward there, Paul.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. I think from my perspective, there's many different scenarios in business, and obviously we're all, as I said, on the team here today, FDs and senior finance folks. So I guess we're used to the metrics. I think the challenges in my career have come from scenarios where there's kind of little or no interest in metrics beyond the core financial metrics, the P&L, the margins, the cash flows, and such like. And I think it's in those scenarios where we all know what the logical, sensible thing to do is, but sometimes that's not greeted with the same level of same welcoming approach to the rest of the management team, because they see risks or concerns and change and so on. So I think that's been the learnings in my career, I would say.
Yes, I think that's something that sort of occurred to me whilst you were talking, is that if people haven't experienced working in that way historically, and therefore don't have first-hand experience of what the real benefits of introducing relevant KPIs can bring, it must be really difficult to get them on site.
Yes, and that's where you have to sort of engage on a more kind of emotional level in many respects, which sometimes as FDs is not always necessarily our strong suit.
Okay, so I'll just say once again, would anybody like to share an experience or actually ask Paul a question relating to the presentation today? I suppose what I would say. Oh, sorry. Do go ahead.
Hi, Paul. I suppose the crux of this one is about, I suppose, what do you feel is a kind of reasonable number in terms of KPIs? I mean, obviously, you could go to town and have one for everything under the sun, but I suppose strategically you probably want to be, I mean, I'm kind of thinking something in the region of 10 to 15 is probably the absolute maximum of what you would want to go for.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. I think thanks for your question. I think it depends on the context, I suppose, of the thing that you're trying to measure. You can use it for sort of many different things within the organization. I think from a strategy standpoint, I would always almost say you don't really want any more than 5 top level KPIs, because I think there's a real danger that you spend then so much time debating those things. That's not to say that you can't have more KPIs through the various different departments that kind of roll up, if you like. But I think from a strategy standpoint and measuring performance against what you desire or what you agree on are the business priorities, I would sort of counsel that no more than 5 really. And ensure that is very, very clearly tied back to your strategic objectives over the next, I don't know, 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, and then kind of break it down. The tool that I've used in my career is a tool called Hoshin Kanri and strategic deployment, which is essentially based in lean thinking, and that's quite useful at essentially getting you as a management team to think about what are the key things as a business that you want to be doing, what does success look like to you, and then really distilling it down into sort of targets for the next year and then targets for the 2 or 3 years thereafter. that's quite a scientific way of making sure that your KPIs are lined up behind your business objective. Hopefully that answers your question, Andrew. But
yeah, that's great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great.
Right.
Sorry, I think
Can I
David's
ask
got
one?
something to say. Yeah,
Just a quick one. What's been your most successful KPI you've implemented?
That's a very good question. I think really it's around a growth strategy for essentially dragging and dropping a business growth model into another sort of geography or region, and having that sort of business development team own that metric and that growth priority, and then seeing them come to the board meetings once a month to sort of report on their progress. And what we would see in going through that progress is really figuring out what we'd kind of originally thought of as our strategic objective versus what then actually transpired. And that enabled us to make adjustments. And we were struggling to recruit people in the certain territories, so we had to think differently about that. And that's kind of where the magic happens in many respects. The metrics almost prompt the discussion about, okay, so that's not working. So if A isn't working, then collectively we'll agree that we'll go and try B, for example. And I would say that was most successful. It wasn't necessarily successful in terms of the final results, but it was successful in working out that we had to do something differently, if you like. And I think that thing for me is ensuring that you're capturing the business effort and deploying it in the most effective way that you can, because obviously we've all got limited resources.